Guillermo, can you give us like an introduction of your background? How do you get into crypto? Especially, I think a lot of students during the pre-class question collection were very curious about your background being like more into photonics, like PhD there, and how did you navigate into DeFi space?
Yeah, wow. I guess that's a hard question to start with already. Yeah, so why DeFi from like weird physics, quantum? Unclear. I think, so I was into like crypto very, very early on because I had a really cool graphics card back in 2010. I had the coolest graphics card, in fact. I had like learned about this like thing, and I was like, wow, I can like play whatever video games I want on this graphics card. I promise it's going to get back to something actually useful, but right now, bear with me. After, what do you with the coolest graphics card? Well, you play all the coolest video games at the highest settings, and then, the coolest video games with the coolest graphics are all very boring, right? Because everyone focused like 100% of their time making cool graphics, and 0% of their time actually making them interesting. So then the next thing that happened was a friend was like, hey, you can like mine this magical internet money using your like fancy graphics card. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, again, remember the timeline, this is 2010. For context, Bitcoin had just come out in 2008, October of 2008, right? And at the time, there was this like weird thing, Bitcoin, which you could just like magically mine by solving a bunch of like really hard problems on your like really cool graphics card. And so I did that, and then much like the video games, it's not very interesting to just like watch a number go up on your computer and then have it be really loud and hot in your room. So that was my foray into crypto, and approximately like 3 days after mining whatever, some hilarious, probably very small maybe not so small, amount of Bitcoin, which is forever lost to the ether, that was it. And then I had a crazy boss in 2016 called Tarun Chitra. I don't know, some of you maybe are familiar with him. If you're around crypto Twitter, you're probably somewhat familiar. This crazy dude with like crazy blue hair. Well, I guess now it's green? No, I think it's yellow actually. But anyways,
I thought it was red.
Oh, it might, no, actually, no, it's not red yet, but it should be, maybe that's the next one. I'll let him know about it. So he was my ex-boss at this like weird company that we did like weird math for protein folding. But the point is he was really into this thing called Ethereum. He was like, this thing is really cool. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like Ethereum, like what does this mean? It's like you can program like anything you want and just like have it run on like the ether. And I was like, haha, Ethereum, Ether, okay, fine. From there, it kind of devolved into just like hanging out and trying all of these like cute little weird things. And then afterwards, in 2018, my then ex-boss, Tarun, came back and he's like, hey, remember that Ethereum thing? Yeah, I'm doing this crazy thing called Gauntlet, which is like this crazy company that like at the time was simulating how blockchains interacted with each other. And he was like, also, there's this thing called Uniswap. I don't know how many of you have heard of Uniswap out of curiosity. Just if you could like raise your hands just for fun. Okay, so about 50%. So Uniswap at the time was this like insane idea, which is you could go on chain and like trade assets for other assets without requiring any intermediary. This is like very weird, right? Like markets usually work in like one specific way. They work because like you have a bunch of people who like all want to trade. They're willing to buy something for a given price, and some people are willing to sell it, and you're like, cool, you got a market. Uniswap did not quite work this way. So anyways, at the time, Uniswap had this, it was this crazy contract, and it had what is an insane amount of money in it, like $5 million, which is like hilarious by our standards nowadays. But at the time, it was a lot of money. Okay, you got to trust me on this. And for some reason or another, we decided that like, who the hell is going to put $5 million into like this crazy like 200-line piece of code that's like vaguely running on some like magical internet computer, right? In order for people to like trade. And so that was the beginning of the journey with Tarun specifically. Actually, that was a foray, and we started writing a bunch of papers, which at the time, was funny because it was hard to get anyone to read them. And I guess now it's clearly, something happened in the middle. Because in 2018, I would tell people about Uniswap and they'd be like, what the hell are you talking about? And now I guess there's a 250, how many people are here?
Roughly 200.
Okay,
Yeah.
200-person class that's quite full of people hearing me blabber on about weird markets. So I guess that tells you the difference between like 2018 and 2022. And that was the initial foray into crypto and like weird, I guess, paper writing at the time. So why for photonics to crypto? It turns out it's kind of, if you squint enough, it's all the same math. So from physics, you learn a few things. From math, you learn a few things. And it turns out like those are very, very useful tools, which we can get into later. But I think maybe, I don't know, hopefully I don't want to make anyone fall asleep quite yet. That's for 5 minutes from now.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you, Guillermo, for the intro and the interesting journey into crypto and DeFi. That being said, we'll start with some basic question to level set on the DeFi, and then dive into more kind of interesting question about the future, and probably potentially some skepticism around DeFi as well. And then towards the end, we'll probably 15 minutes or so open the floor for questions. So if any question or any point that we discuss, feel free to whenever we have the open floor, or raise your hand, ask questions.
Cool.
All right, cool.
I'm worried about the questions, by the way, but it's fine.
All right. The first question is, just to level set, can you give your view of decentralized finance, right? Why do we need decentralized finance? How is it different from the traditional finance?
Oh, man. Okay. So I guess what is decentralized finance, colloquially known as DeFi, colloquially sometimes known as magical internet money? Okay, so well, I mean, maybe like this is going to get weird and philosophical too quickly, so I'm going to try not to. But what is finance, right? It's like a way of kind of taking a bunch of different assets or things and grouping them in various ways, right? In order to package up risk. This is this is stepping back 50 million steps. We'll probably get something concrete in a second. DeFi is, if you have a financial system, what's a natural thing to do? Well, it's naturally you should be able to trade within this financial system. You should be able to loan things. You should be able to buy things. So DeFi is just one incarnation of that in the context of blockchain, right? Fairly simply, it's what happens if you in order to do things on chain, you have to be able to interact with different assets, interact with different protocols, et cetera. Each of those protocols might require, for some reason, their own token, might require any number of things. Maybe it's good for you to not actually, buy the token. Maybe it's better for you to borrow the token. And so just kind of naturally, as an outgrowth of having a cool financial magical internet money platform, the next thing to do is make a cool magical financial magical internet money finance thing that you could lets you kind of trade or use your money in a more efficient way, right? Rather than just buying it and holding it, or buying it and giving it to other people, right? So it's kind of the highest level of DeFi. What is DeFi nowadays? I think it's mostly a collection of trading platforms, lending platforms, certain options protocols, some of which are kind of weird. I don't know how many people are familiar with options here, but just traditional financial instruments. And then a bunch of other things that actually are very shockingly odd. I think one of them is called Squeeth or something, which is these are things that are, let's say, difficult to do in traditional financial systems, other than by kind of writing a 100-page long contract. But it turns out you can do them just using some basic math. You can actually construct them fairly easily. So that's what DeFi is now. I don't know what DeFi will be in the future, but that certainly is what 90% of DeFi is now. Maybe I'm forgetting some protocol here and there, but maybe some fixed lending or fixed income things. But they're fairly minimal, I think, when compared to the volume of trading and the volume of lending, I think, which each have many tens of billions of dollars currently. Today, you can go on, check it out. So hopefully that answers the question. I don't know if I missed a second question in there. Did I?
Yeah,
or?
I think you answered the question.
Okay.
DeFi in general, a high level, and kind of why do we need a DeFi?
Right. So why do we need DeFi? I mean, kind of when you have a financial thing, you want to make like your money work for you in some sense or another, right? Like you can't, like it's cool to like have, again, I will refer to like, I guess the problem with magical internet money is that it's like now an overloaded term because someone actually used it to like as their token name, which is really silly. But whatever. The point is like you have this thing that exists and you can just like hold it. But like what if you could actually do other things with this asset, right? And so DeFi is the natural next step of maybe I can lend that asset out to someone. Maybe I can trade it for other things. Maybe I can construct some crazy like elaborate thing with it. I don't know. That's the level 0 answer to why one might need DeFi. There's other things too, but maybe we'll get to those in the spicier questions.
Sure. All right. Thank you for kind of describing DeFi like kind of high level. Mm-hmm. So I'm just curious, based on your personal research or your research like within Bain Capital Crypto, what's either your personal view or a view as organization, part of the research team, like some of the gaps you see in the DeFi ecosystem and some interesting future trends? You said it's hard to foresee the future, but you think it would be interesting that might form part of DeFi 3.0? Especially like we're in Stanford, I think a lot of students are very curious doing some sort of startups. So ideas potentially.
Oh man. I guess if I knew what DeFi 3.0 would be, I'm not sure I would be here. I would probably be, hopefully making it or, having someone else make it. Well, I mean, maybe all of you. I don't know. If you're not careful, at least. So I guess maybe it is good that I'm here. But unfortunately for you, I do not know what DeFi 3.0 is, so I have no active free alpha to give here. I can give like a very obviously biased version of what I think DeFi 3.0 will be, which to me is like much more exciting. But okay, so kind of stepping back, right? Again, weirdly, all of these protocols like exist, right? And they're like some smart contract on some chain. And fundamentally, like the entire point of this whole exercise of decentralization is like, you make Bitcoin because you like don't want to trust any one authority, right? The whole point of Bitcoin, the whole reason why like we run all of these like very complicated machinery, right, in order to like make sure that everyone is in consensus, and like it's very expensive, it's very difficult, right? The reason why we do it fundamentally is because like we want to be decentralized. And unfortunately, a good amount of DeFi right now is not decentralized. Like it relies on specific intermediaries, kind of called oracles, telling you the truth. So in other words, telling you like what the price of an asset is. How does one construct, certain payoffs? How does one like create certain loans, and how does one like liquidate them, et cetera? So, okay, or liquidate the collateral, whatever. But so right now, in some sense, we've like built this like insane machine, right, that like solves a bunch of really hard problems from computer science, and now we've built stuff on top of it, right? And like this stuff on top of it is like great because it works pretty well, like 99% of the time. But then every once in a while, right, like this question of like trusting this like weird authority telling you the truth, right, that you currently need to construct these protocols, like it's a very bad assumption to make and ends up failing, right? So I think the DeFi to I guess maybe DeFi 3.0 or 2, I don't know whatever version we're currently at right now, like actually will get rid of those intermediaries. The problem, of course, is that it's very easy to build things when you assume that you know the truth. It is very hard to build things when you don't know what the truth is and you have to discover it yourself. In other words, like when you don't know what the price of the asset is, and somehow your protocol must like learn the price of the asset in some sense, without relying on someone telling you what that is much, much harder than just being like, yeah, look, I just like query like cool little, set of like people telling me that the price of, Ethereum is like 1,300 right now or whatever, versus like creating a protocol such that everyone's incentives are aligned in such a way that you don't actually need that in the first place. So that's where I hope DeFi will move in the future. And there's been a bunch of, I don't know if you've been following the current crypto Twitter ramblings. There's been a bunch of attacks essentially using the notion that these, people can kind of manipulate these prices fairly easily. and so you can cause a bunch of protocols to break. So that's where I think DeFi is hopefully moving into in the near future. But it's very hard. It's very, very difficult because it's not just a hard engineering problem. It's a quite difficult mathematical one too. So that's the first version of that.
Sure. Thank you for sharing with us your view. Another question could be is also related to the future, which is like a lot of students actually very curious. It's like DeFi. I think I checked actually 3 hours ago.
Oh no.
Kind of if you use one of the metric like a total value locked, which is like total amount of money or Ethereum or whatever token equivalent US dollars locked in protocols, DeFi related protocols, that's a metric we use to measure like DeFi protocol. It's around $50 billion. And then that's still, although sounds impressive, it's still very, very small compared to traditional finance, which is like in the trillions or tens of trillions. Mm-hmm. What's your view that's missing for those big organizations, the traditional finance, to get into the space? If they ever will consider.
Right.
First, would they consider? You think they will consider? Second is, if they consider, what's missing?
I'm sure it's being considered. I don't see why not, right? Like it's yet another kind of possible inflow of, let's say, cash or assets or another way of diversifying your portfolio, et cetera, whatever you'd like, whatever fancy excuse you want to like make for yourself as a big company to like make more money. I think there's a few things that are difficult about DeFi. The kind of most glaring problem is that it's very slow. And I don't mean slow as in like, oh, it's like slow moving and like people aren't like improving on it a lot. No, I mean like slow as in like it's literally slow. Like in order for you to make a good number of transactions on Ethereum, like good luck. You're going to pay a lot of money, and even that is going to be like quite capped. So that already kind of rules out a good amount of high frequency trading relative to like other things. Although people still do it, and this is like a longer topic that we can get into later, probably over pizza, actually. So that's one part. Number two is I think a lot of kind of big companies are fairly risk averse, right? And it's like the second that you have an asset that goes down 30% in a day, usually if the stock market goes down like 3% in a day, there's like a bunch of like breakers that like all go up, and everyone like's hair is on fire and like they're running around and like the trading floor. On the other hand, like assets going down 30% in a day is like yet another day in the life. Right, which is fine. I mean, it's cool. It's insane that we build systems that are like resilient to like things going down 30% or so. And so that's kind of, this is like the very slow moving funds are like very risk averse in that sense. I of course think there's some regulatory questions about like how do you, you're like a pension fund that's managing a bunch of money. Like you can't just like ape into like a bunch of like DeFi protocols, right? That's probably very weird. I unfortunately have no actual like notion of the law, so and of course I'm not a lawyer. But like my point is like, kind of there's a lot of regulatory like, there's no clarity here, so it's very hard to know like how to actually interact with these things in a way that's like legit and cool with the law. And then finally, I think it's just kind of honestly really damn hard to use. Like DeFi right now is like really freaking hard to use. Like interfacing with it, constructing things on it, like using it in any useful sense. Like you should, I mean, I'm sure you all can figure it out, but let's say my grandma probably will not be able to like figure out how to take out a loan on Aave with her like, whatever Shiba token as collateral or whatever. I mean, whatever you're into, right? Like there's just no way. The probability like is roughly zero. Not that actually you can do that on Aave. Well, I hope you can't actually. That would be very bad. But anyways, so I think all of these things like contribute like fairly deeply into this problem of like, holy crap, like yeah, sure, there's like this system, which is like very small relative to, traditional finance. But at the end of the day, it's still like another thing to do. Like why kind of we don't have like these bigger companies kind of coming in and like using it, as yet another income stream or something like this. But again, unfortunately, I'm not particularly good friends with like people in Citadel and stuff. So, I would not be able to actively tell you these things.
Okay. Thank you. It's quite insightful. All the different views around how to have the mainstream adoption or TriFi adoption of DeFi. So now I think we're going to navigate a little bit more into the deeper skepticism, spicy question area.
Ooh, okay. I wonder if I have good answers for this.
So one question is around, you mentioned I think a lot of big institutions, they have concern about regulation, like the fact that it's slow and the volatility, et cetera. But another problem that actually is kind of a blocker, if you think the future is everything's programmable, it's composable, et cetera, but it also make it easier or relatively easier or much easier for hackers to hack, and they can just one person with no money do a flash loan and pull off hundreds of millions of hacks. Just one person.
That's right.
Out of nowhere in his personal computer. So what's your view on that part, the vulnerability, if it becomes super composable and super capital efficient? Yeah.
So, by the way, this is actually, before we can get to that, this is possibly one of the most insane things in the world. Does everyone know what flash loans are? Does anyone not know what flash loans are? Okay, at least one person. Okay, there's a good number of people. This is actually the most ridiculous thing in the world, by the way. Just let's touch on that first before we get to because this will enable the next conversation. It's like a prereq in the tech tree or whatever. Okay, so flash loans are essentially an instantaneous loan for any arbitrary amount of money. The only promise you have to have is that you repay the loan after your transaction is completed. So, okay, what happens in let's say, Ethereum? You have a transaction. You call a bunch of things. For example, you do a bunch of swaps. You take out a bunch of loans, whatever you'd like, right? A flash loan enables you to do the following. It says, at the beginning of your transaction, which is composed of a bunch of different things, doesn't matter what it is, you're allowed to borrow as much money as you'd like. I will give you as much money as you'd like, with the promise that at the very end of your transaction, you have paid back all of the amount, potentially with a bit of a fee. But actually, for a lot of things, it's actually free, so you don't even have to think about the fee. Okay, so what happens? The transaction goes on the blockchain, right? Let's say it gets accepted by someone. And then it gets executed. So you start, let's say I borrow $10 million. I don't have to have any collateral. I am simply allowed to just take the money, and then do a bunch of stuff with it. So okay, so I've been given $10 million. I do a bunch of things in the middle. And if at the end of the transaction, I've paid back my $10 million, then the transaction goes through. And it's as if everything was, everyone was happy because you paid back the transaction. Everything happened great. We're all happy. Okay. If something happens in the middle and I cannot pay back the $10 million, the transaction reverts, and it is as if nothing had happened in the first place. So in some sense, it is a riskless loan that I do, that someone has given me, that is enabled by the fact that you can program this thing, and then the transactions execute what are called atomically. They execute either all at once or not at all. Right? This is crazy, by the way. This is possibly the most insane thing that I don't know. This does not exist anywhere in traditional finance. There's nothing similar to this in traditional finance. If this doesn't kind of blow your mind, there's 2 doors over there, you should probably get out, right? This is bonkers. Okay, so why do flash loans? Fine. Okay, so now we've got that ground settled, which is crazy. Oh, sorry, I didn't actually mean that, I promise. But okay, that's fine. Anyways, so okay, so fine. So why are flash loans useful for hackers? Well, the quick version of it is, look, if I can loan $100 million, with absolutely no collateral requirement, and I can pull off a hack, for example, one thing you can do is you can borrow $100 million, push the price of an asset up, right? And then cause things, for example, things that depend on the price of that asset to happen, to cascade, right? And then if it just so happens that that gives you a bigger profit than you started with, then congratulations, you have pulled it off, and you now have more money than you started with, so you just pay back the loan and you've made a free profit. Okay, so in some sense, this is, flash loans are very seem like a very bad idea because it's like, okay, wait, you're just given like, every 10-year-old in their mom's basement, like the ability to just like go and play around with protocols until like they make some profit. I mean, they're expensive on Ethereum, so I wouldn't, actually recommend doing this. But on the other hand, you've kind of done something also like weird and insane, which is traditionally you have to have a fund with $100 million to be able to like do trading, right? To be able to like do whatever basic things you want to do. Now, of course, I can just write like 5 lines of code and then just be able to do the same things without any additional capital requirements. So in some sense, like these systems are fairly like efficient in this particular sense because this fact that it's enabled. So unfortunately, these things come as like dual-edged swords, right? And DeFi right now is extremely brittle. Like we've written some very good contracts that are very battle tested and some very bad contracts that are very not battle tested, and these lead to like silly hacks. There's a bunch of ways of mitigating it. The kind of boring, obvious answer is we do things, I throw out fancy terms like formal verification and like all of the stuff, and it's like, congratulations, you can probably give some assumptions under which like this contract is safe, and then like guarantee that. Kind of at the higher level, right, there is like, you actually just make good mechanisms that don't have these problems, right? That's a little bit harder, certainly. But the point is, like, if we want to enable kind of the financial system of the future, well, we better hope it's pretty damn secure against like silly things like this, right? So fundamentally, I think yes, right, like there's a bunch of problems with it, and this is the crazy part about like software engineering is that it's like really hard, right? Somehow, I feel like less bridges have fallen than like, or less physical bridges have fallen than like metaphorical bridges have fallen over the past 100 years. But not so metaphorical, sorry, on-chain bridges. But I think at the end of the day, right, like everything kind of becomes like a profession and becomes like a thing that exists, and like you have good procedures around it about how to construct these things safely, how to prove things about these like DeFi protocols and about their safety and things like that. And so, as kind of an art, and let's call it an art, develops, right, and like it becomes more concrete and like becomes more like common for things to do. And therefore, as kind of a consequence of that, as like of a space maturing, you just like get good, right? But unfortunately, yeah, it's very hard to say kind of in the interim what is happening and why it's happening. So,
all right. Thank you. Thank
cool.
you for the question, for the answer. I just want to do a quick time check. So we're about 12 minutes or so left.
Okay.
I think we want to open the floor for questions.
Oh no.
Students have
that's quite bad actually. Be nice.
And yeah, so if you have more questions, also Guillermo will be here after the class, so you can ask too after the class.
Cool. Does anyone have any questions?
No question. I do have one more question. Go.
All right.
So yeah, I guess there's a lot of different chains that DeFi can operate on, like, but there, like, I know there's like risk with fragmenting liquidity, and you move on to new chains. Like, what do you kind of see like in the future, like the most capital efficiency will come from being on a single chain centered around DeFi, or like over time, like, we'll be able to bridge assets so easily that doesn't matter? Or, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on that?
So I don't know if I've ever heard that, but essentially, right now there's a bunch of protocols on a bunch of different chains that lead to something called fragmented liquidity. So as protocols have more capital, they are become more efficient. They become more useful. And right now there's the question of, okay, if that's true, then why? Do we not expect one chain to accrue all of the value, right? Because if you have a very little amounts of money, in a bunch of different protocols, it's very bad for users. But if you have a lot of money in one single protocol, that's very good for users. So actually, I will dispute the assumption that you're making, which is that actually that's a bad thing. So it turns out in a lot of the protocols that we care about, you can do things like optimal routing. So I can essentially construct kind of a higher level protocol that what it does is it kind of aggregates everyone's liquidity. So this is what it's called. Liquidity is roughly speaking the amount of money locked in a protocol. And then and then it creates this like higher level protocol that acts as if it was like the coolest protocol that had everyone's money like all pooled together. This is not true of everything, so there's no kind of general solution, but it's true for things like decentralized exchanges, which are possibly the most common application. So I guess since you're asking that question, we have a weird set of papers on that, so you should go check them out. But the answer is you can often do it, and it often works extremely well in practice, even across chains. So hopefully that answered your question. OK. What's up?
Yeah, for a lot of traditional illiquid instruments that are out there, there is no high frequency trading. So why do we need like Ethereum to be that much quicker in order for those to be moved on chain?
So the question was, for a lot of illiquid assets, there is no need for high frequency trading. So why do we need Ethereum to be faster? Well, fundamentally, the problem is that Ethereum right now, it doesn't matter if you're trading in the illiquid or the liquid assets, you're all competing for the same space on the block, right? So I mean, there's like, that's the whole reason why, people bribe validators in order to be like the first in the queue, right? So that's not the only reason. There's a bunch of other things too, kind of that go in it, but that was kind of the simplest to state reason in approximately 5 minutes. So yeah, let's say it's hard to be very efficient when you have to like compete with other people for the same like space in a given block, right? Other people do it, and actually they're very good at it. But it's a different ballgame. And I think honestly another thing is for like these much larger hedge funds, the volume traded is relatively low. So the number of dollars that you can actually put to work is still relatively low, simply because like these long tail assets just don't have that much liquidity. So you wouldn't want to do that anyways. Okay. Here, I'll let you choose the next.
All right, go for it.
So you mentioned that like Uniswap happened like back in 2016.
18.
But like it didn't actually like boom until like 2020. So like there was like a lot of invention and ongoing. For example, the Stanford actually like advanced the AMM first before Uniswap. And also like there was a bunch of innovation. For example, like the compounds, like the liquidity mining. So in your mind, what's the most important thing that you think that caused like the booming of the Uniswap ecosystem? Because like it has been silent for 2 years, and then it suddenly like become like booming, and the funds is flowing in. So what was the changing moment?
So I mean, I get to cheat and I say it was not actually silent for 2 years because I was looking at it roughly by the end of 2018. So yeah, if you were around for what is colloquially known as DeFi summer, it appears as if kind of Uniswap and Sushi and a bunch of any millions of forks happened like all of a sudden in 2020 and then like kind of did not exist before. So and I'll address the banker point in a second, but no, in some ways it was a steady buildup, and then the idea that you could like construct incentives on top of Uniswap, I think, made it very popular for kind of obvious, potentially Ponzi-nomic reasons, right? Sorry, I have to limit the number of things I say I have to be very careful with what I say because technically I think this is going online and it's being recorded. So but okay, so that's the first part is kind of to the in the external part, like to the exterior, it seems as if like things didn't exist, and then kind of in 2020, summer of 2020, they suddenly like started existing. I'll debate that narrative a little bit because it's not quite the case. It turns out like a bunch of protocols, such as Balancer and then Curve, like all kind of appeared actually kind of 2019. Regarding the Bancor comment, is they had something that tasted and smelled like automated market making, but wasn't quite actually. Did not actually have the important part of automated market making. They were really close, but it wasn't quite it. And we can talk about that a little bit more offline. But let's say technically it's distinct enough that I would actually classify it as a separate entity. Do you have time for one
5
more?
minutes, so we can take one
One or two? Okay.
Go ahead.
You pointed out how DeFi protocols can be vulnerable if they depend on like third-party data feed over, right? how do you propose that this becomes better or safer in any way?
I can't tell if you're egging me on in this question because you've read the papers or if you are egging me on because you work at one of these companies.
Both.
Yeah, okay, so that's bad. All right, great. So it turns out, wow, holy crap, how am I going to explain this in like less than 5 minutes? It turns out kind of at a high level, you can construct, like mathematically construct certain protocols where just by like setting up the math correctly, you can align everyone's incentives in such a way that people are not incentivized to lie to you. In particular, I can set up a protocol such that like you have two players. One player is taking one side of the trade, the other player is taking the other side of the trade. And because of that, you can make sure that like if you set up the incentives just the right way, if anybody lies, so if anybody like does the wrong thing, tries to manipulate it, tries to cheat, they actually end up worse off than they would have been by just telling the truth. That's called incentive compatibility. And it turns out in a lot of cases, not everything, but in a lot of cases, you can construct protocols which are incentive compatible and do not require external price feeds or do not require kind of external truth telling in order for them to function. But anyways, I suspect you already knew that answer, so I'm gonna leave that for now, and then I think you had one more question.
Yeah, I was just curious, at what point do you think it's necessary to regulate DeFi? At what point do you think it's necessary to regulate DeFi, and at what point does regulation become a boon for the adoption of DeFi for a broader, like, I guess, everyday people?
At what point do I think it's necessary to regulate DeFi, and at what point does it become a boon to regulate? Wow. So I guess I'm going to give a cop-out answer to this, 100% cop-out, and I'm like claiming it up front, is that it's very hard to strike a balance in a nascent field. Nascent. Thank you. In a nascent field, right, where innovation is happening very quickly, right? It's very, very easy to simply say like something is too risky or something is too vulnerable or something does not, and justify it afterwards, right? Much easier, in fact, than kind of like constructing something that works, right? And that's what you don't want to do. Is the trade-off is too easy to make, and in fact, it's so easy that like we are constantly in danger of falling into that. That's not to say that like obviously like some amount of regulation is like important, right? The question is when, I think, and right now it's unclear, like what like that even means, like what that question is, right? Like it's unclear. Like, are we at like what DeFi will look like in 20 years? Like, no, I don't think we're close, right? Like, have we discovered all of the like fundamental truths about how to construct decentralized markets? Like, I don't think we're close, and I think overburdened regulation or overburdening regulation will very quickly tamp that down. And that's kind of what you don't want. So, but it's a hard, very, very difficult trade-off to make, and the answer is I have no idea what it is. Cool.
Yeah.
And then
I just checked 5:19. I think it's about time. If
Cool.
you guys have questions, feel free to kind of come to the stage, ask questions, and after we also have pizza meetup. So.
Sounds good.
Right.
All right.
Thank you, Guillermo.
Well, thank you for having me.
your time.
Yeah.